for this seminar.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, I am Dr. Prakash Masram, in charge head Department of History, University of Bombay. Ma'am, warmly welcome for this seminar. Then we have a chairperson of today's seminar, Dr. Shivram Garje sir, Professor, Department of History, Associate Dean, Science, Faculty of Science and Technology, University of Mumbai. Warmly welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
For this seminar. And also on this occasion, today we have celebrating National Science Day. So in the collaboration with the International School of International Relations and Strategic Study, University of Mumbai, the IC Director and Honorable Dean Rajesh Kharaj sir. Sir has given the opportunity to this seminar for organization this seminar. So thank you very much, sir, for this. And of course, on this special day, we have Dr. Mrudulla Ramanna ma'am as a resource person for this seminar. Ma'am, warmly welcome for this seminar on behalf of the Department of History and School of International Relations and Strategic Study, University of Mumbai. And my dear faculty members from the Department of History and University of Mumbai. Basically, on the occasion of National Science Day, and we are celebrating the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So we organized this seminar on the coping with epidemics and raising issue of public health, Indian doctors in colonial Bombay. Basically, our history is the mother of all subjects, and which having the natural sciences, science and technology, humanities and social sciences. So we are very much fortunate being a student of history because we study all kind of the natural sciences and humanities and social sciences. So we have given this opportunity to organize this seminar from the authority University of Mumbai. Once again, due to time constraint, ma'am, once again, I warmly welcome to all the dignitaries, today's chief guest, chairperson and resource person for this special occasion. With these words, I will stop here, ma'am. Now over to Professor Dr. Nita Khandpekar, ma'am. Please kindly introduce our today's chief guest, resource person and chairperson of this seminar.
A very good evening to all. I am so delighted to introduce the three dignitaries offline today. I would introduce with my teacher, the resource person today, Dr. Ramanna. My encounter with Dr. Ramanna always began with visiting at Maharashtra State Archives. I really used to admire that after taking her college lectures, she used to be always seated in the archives doing her work. Madam did her BA and MA from New Delhi. Consequently, she did her PhD from Mumbai. Her PhD thesis, English Education and Social Changes in Bombay City from 1815 to 1858. She submitted in 1985, and I'm proud to say that when I did work on Christian missionaries, her thesis was very much useful to me, which is housed in Fort Library campus. For our students, I'm telling this. She had 34 years of teaching experience and was former HOD with the famous SIS college at Sion. Her book, Western Medicine and Public Health in Colonial Bombay, now Mumbai, was published by Orient Longman, New Delhi, 2002. And she also edited this book on the series of Edmund Moore, founders and guardians of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai in 2014. It was a beautiful series wherein a lot of administrators of 19th century Mumbai were published by the Asiatic Society. Her work, Facets of Public Health in Early 20th Century, is a very recent one. She had edited chapters in several edited volumes published from London, Delhi, and Mumbai, articles in the Journal of Royal Society of Medicine, Indian Historical Review, EPW, Social Scientist, National Medical Journal of India, prestigious Indica, Journal of University of Mumbai, Parsiana, Journal of K.R. Kama Oriental Institute. In all these journals, she has published a lot of articles. Our students should make note of this. She is recipient of the Rockefeller Residency Award, New York. Research grants came from Wellcome Trust, London, the Heras Institute, Dorab Tata Trust, ICSSR, ICHR, all prestigious institutions. You name it, and madam have it. So it's so nice that we have our own teacher here with us today. And this is the second program of Department of History and School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, University of Mumbai, celebrating the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. And also today is the National Science Day. So it's a very nice occasion. We have this second e-seminar, Coping with Epidemics and Raising Issues of Public Health. I am proud to say that we have a paper on medicine in semester third, taught by our Associate Dean, Dr. Manjiri Kamath. So I welcome Ramanna Madam for this talk today. I'm so much touched that you used to visit our department as a visiting teaching faculty, and today you are the resource persons with us. Welcome online very much. Now I introduce the chief guest of the session today, Dr. Anuradha Majumdar Madam, our own Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology, University of Mumbai. Before I give her her formal biodata, I am always proud of her, madam, because she is heading the CMAS Institute, which started last year, and a lot of good online programs the CMAS conducted. Her 7-page biodata, since I'm not from the science arena, but whatever impressed me, I jotted it down, ma'am. She did her B.Pharm and M.Pharm from Nagpur University, from where our HOD is also there. So some similarity with our present HOD Masram sir, madam. She did her PhD on pharmacology in 2006 from University of Mumbai. From 2011 to 18, she had chaired a lot of symposiums. In fact, in her biodata, it is also mentioned this gold medal in Avishkar 2014, which is very, very important. Recent patent list shows 4 publications in journals of drugs and delivery sciences also seen. What I liked about her biodata was, in her biodata, she has written about her lab. I was always taken about, in our biodata, we never write about history department, ma'am. So we should be doing it in future. So about her lab, she has written, and also she has written about her work with reproductive toxicity. Her collaboration shows a list with TMC Kharghar, Board of Radiations and Isotope Technology Vashi, Tata Memorial Hospital Parel, BARC, BRC, that is consultancy services, shows list of 7 different places, to name a few: Shreya Life Sciences, Charak Pharma Private Limited. Her areas of interest seems to be herbals and synthetic molecules for various pharmacological activities and behavioral pharmacology. The list is big. I have just taken it in a short way. Welcome, ma'am, as chief guest for this National Science Day program to our department, ma'am.
Thank you, Nita, ma'am.
Yeah, yes. Welcome to here. Now I introduced our chairperson, Dr. Shivram Garje sir. गर्जे सर से शायद एक आध बारी कभी मुलाकात हुई है, वैसे नहीं हुई है मेरी पर्सनली, लेकिन I admire Garje sir and Dr. Manjiri Kamath's work in 2021. Jointly, they guided us for the first online examination, which was held in 2020, rather, I would say. So in that sense, I have heard you, Dr. Garje sir. Sir is BSc, MSc and PhD from University of Mumbai with first division. He is Professor, Department of Chemistry and Associate Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology, University of Mumbai. He did his PhD Chemistry from the Chemistry Division of BARC, Mumbai, and did his postdoc in 2005 and 6, University of Manchester, UK. And before joining University of Mumbai, sir worked with the prestigious Institute of Science, Mumbai and University of Pune. He was a research fellow at BARC in 1994 to 1998. Sir, from your 50-page biodata, I could just jot down certain points because I'm not a very good person with chemistry. So just pardon me if I miss some of the points. He is member of 9 professional societies, 15 research papers in referred journals, and several research.
Madam, you can skip, no problem. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Sir, let our students know what stalwarts are there today to be there with them. Total citations 546. When I read this, no, sir, I was feeling such a good work for the NAC. H index 11, I10 index 14. Sir has 7 PhD students, 3 major projects completed by sir. Sir, so welcome to you, to our department, sir.
Thank you very much, madam.
Over to the chief guest for her address, Dr. Majumdar, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Neeta Khandpekar, madam. Congratulations to, please bear with me. I have a bandwidth issue, so I'm going to keep my video off. Congratulations to Department of History and the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies. My dear colleague, Professor Rajesh Kharat, Dean of Humanities, Dr. Mridula Ramanna, when I heard your introduction from Dr. Neeta, it was so endearing to know about your achievements and your involvement with University of Mumbai. Professor Shivram Garje, my dear colleague, again, Associate Dean of Science, who's going to chair the session, Dr. Prakash Masram. I'm so happy to know you're from Nagpur. You know, that is, I think, a very strong connect, which we can always say when you come from Vidarbha. My very dear colleague, again, Dr. Manjiri Kamath, ma'am, Associate Dean of Humanities, all the faculty of History Department of International Relations and Strategic Studies, and my dear students from History and other departments of Humanities. I wanted to say that, you know, राष्ट्रीय विज्ञान दिवस के उपलक्ष्य में आप सबको शुभकामनाएं. Let's pledge, all of us, be it science, be it technology, be it humanities, be it interdisciplinary. Let's pledge to continue serving science and its nurturing and its upliftment. As Masram sir said, history is the mother of subjects, and I too believe in it. And I would just narrate my understanding of the same as a prelude to what Professor Kharat would say and our dear speaker, our revered speaker, Dr. Mridula would speak about. So let's pledge to work towards science. As I said, this year, Government of India has announced the theme of National Science Day 2022 to be integrated approach in science and technology for the sustainable future. And we know there are so many verticals for sustainability, which includes community, humanities, society, economics. So you cannot be watertight. So it is borderless when we talk about, you know, working for sustainability and sustainable development. Further to this, United Nations has declared 2022 as the year of basic science for sustainable development. So this also is actually, this declaration was done before the NSD theme declaration, and it actually resonates with our theme of NSD 22 as well. And further, I would say that it is sync with your title, Professor Kharat and team, Coping with Epidemics and Raising Issues of Public Health, Indian Doctors in Colonial Bombay. So when I was just talking what to speak about, you know, I was a bit scared, worried that I have to now address humanities experts and people like Dr. Mridula and Professor Kharat and Professor Manjiri Masram sir, etc. So let me tell you a bit about how we perceive. Basically, I come from a background of pharma, and I'm a pharmacologist, which is a subject which is common to both medical sciences and pharmaceutical sciences. So for us, evolution of science and medicinal interventions is very much connected to what you were talking about what mankind in colonial Bombay has faced how treatments have evolved, how doctors came in. I remember once Professor Manjiri shared an article on the history of Kasturba Hospital. During the COVID phase 1, we saw how Kasturba Hospital, before all these COVID jumbo centers were built, served when we knew nothing about COVID-19, and that it is taking a pandemic proportion, right? So as we see, the Bombay, as a colonial Bombay, which we know of, has faced a lot of epidemics, including the 1896 biopolitical crisis of the bubonic plague, which continued up till the early part of the 20th century. Other than that, the colonial Bombay or Bombay city as we know of, has faced epidemics of cholera, malaria, smallpox, and influenza. From bacterial infections and epidemics, followed by, many of them being virus epidemics, smallpox, right? Influenza. And as you know, whenever there is viral infections and bacterial infections, the opportunist fungal infections also come through, and that lead to further exacerbation of the conditions and worsening of the epidemic and its proportions, which we've seen even with COVID-19. Remember the mucormycosis, the black fungus, which we saw in the second wave of COVID, leading to retinal damage and brain damage because of fungal infections, which was a collateral to the COVID-19 virus infection. So this is what we have seen, and I would like to tell to my dear students and my colleagues, even if you see parallelly, if you draw an analogy to what happened globally, it is similar. As you know that Indian soldiers participated under the colonial rule both a bit in World War I and more in World War II. They were very much present in the front lines in World War II. So the early part, whether it is the 19th century or the 20th century, mankind was very much affected by infectious diseases. Most of the mortality, morbidity which we saw was because of infections. You know how villages were left, and vacated and abandoned when there were cholera outbreaks or when plague outbreaks was there. Very similar to what happened in Europe in those days. So what we saw, that in the earlier days, arsenic and those kind of toxic compounds were used, very crude way of surgical removal of septic regions, etc., because there was no antibiotic. What was the game changer in all this evolution? What you also know as the history of evolution of emerging doctors and medical treatments and the treatment centers. One was the serendipitous discovery of penicillins by Alexander Fleming in the early part of 1930s. When I say serendipitous, he was not looking for finding an antibiotic. He was having a bacterial growing culture plates. And what he found, my dear students, that's why you should always have a lateral thinking, eye for detail. How did Sir Alexander Fleming discover penicillin, which changed the game of treating infections? He saw that his bacterial plates, where he was growing bacterial colonies, was showing zones of inhibition of bacterial growth. And when he checked it, he did not put it under the wash under the tap and washed it off. Arey, my experiment has failed. No. He said, why is there inhibition? He checked that there was a contamination with molds, which is fungi. And then he further tried to determine and investigate which mold. And that came out with a series of, penicillium species of molds and fungi, which actually gave us natural antibiotics. And then there was tetracycline, aminoglycosides, synthetic antimicrobials, which we see now, like norfloxacin, etc. See, all those things are used in urinary tract infections, severe GI tract infections. And, synthetic molecules came into the picture. And vaccines. How could we eradicate smallpox? Because of vaccines. How could we contain after the phase 2 of COVID? Right? Because of vaccines. And now government, after the 2 doses of vaccine, is also promoting and advising us to go for a booster dose. today, there are many immunomodulators. You know, our immune system in our blood, we have the RBCs or red blood cells, which give us oxygen, and we have the WBCs, white blood cells, which we've studied in our 10th standard, which is associated with defense. And today, we can actually prompt our and redirect our own WBCs to fight certain viruses and bacteria, specifically with more armor and more fortification. Can you imagine that? It was not imagined 100 years back. So, my dear students, one more important thing, when I'm sure Mridula madam will also dwell on, is that earlier lifestyle diseases was not much in focus. We heard about blood pressure and diabetes, let's say around 1980s. Right, 1980s, 90s. 1980s, we came to know, okay, there's something called as blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, okay, high cholesterol. And these words, I have high cholesterol, was often heard. And before that, we never heard about it, because probably infectious disease were the overriding factor. And number two, sedentary lifestyle had not set in because of mechanization. And now, you know, the women or the men folk used to do a lot of physical work, and because of which lifestyle diseases, even if it was there, was not, was not predominant. Now, lifestyle disorders is more predominant, especially in the developed countries, but you cannot rule out India also, which is in the forefront of becoming the diabetic capital of the world. Now remember, in all this meantime, cancer was always there. If you've read the book Emperor of All Maladies by Siddharth Mukherjee, you will realize how the treatment and the understanding of different forms of cancers evolved across the globe, including in India, and how treatment modalities changed over the decades. So this program, Professor Kharat, Professor Manjiri Kamath, Masram sir, Garje sir will be there for the event. It is very, very important because it is also telling our history students and humanities students that nothing is watertight, everything is correlated to each other, and you already have a course in history of medicine and medical practitioners in your curricula. But also, history is the one which keeps us grounded. History keeps us grounded because it gives us the entire picture of what transpired in the past and what could happen again. And therefore, it improves our preparedness for any eventuality, whether it is epidemics which we've seen in the past, including, remember, in Mumbai, we had cases of cerebral malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, and how KM Hospital had equipped themselves to screen all patients who are coming with fever, whether they are having, cerebral malaria in the form of chloroquine resistant malaria species. So, we have always equipped ourselves. Or be it pandemic like COVID-19. And remember, India had also faced the Spanish flu in the earlier part of the 20th century. And after more than 100 years, we are facing the COVID-19 pandemic. And I really congratulate Masram sir, Prakash sir. I think it's hats off to you. And I'm sure under the guidance of Professor Kharat and Manjiri ma'am, wonderful topic to be taken as part of National Science Day and Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for inviting me to be the chief guest of this event. I'm privileged and I'm very much, very indeed, elated to be part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anuradha Majumdar ma'am, for giving very, valuable time and sharing your thoughts regarding the history of science and technology and the epidemics and various kind of the disease and their, awareness among the citizen of the India. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now, I request Professor Garje sir, please, as a chairperson of this seminar, to start the, to proceed further. Yeah, requested to Garje sir, please.
Thank you, Masram sir. So straightway we'll go to the talk of from the invited speaker. So already the speaker has been introduced by one of our colleague. So today we have eminent speaker, Dr. Murudula Ramanna, and she is going to talk on coping with epidemics and raising issues of public health and the Indian doctors, how they played role in Colonial Bombay. So I now request Murudula Madam to start her lecture. So Madam, over to you. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to speak at the University of Mumbai, my alma mater. I'm grateful to the Department of History and the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies for inviting me. And I'm grateful to Dr. Anuradha Majumdar for her very insightful comments. And I'm grateful to Dr. Masram, whom I had not met earlier, a young in-charge head of the department, and my old friend, Dr. Manjari, and Dr. Neeta. Thank you for your kind words. I found Dr. Majumdar's comments very appropriate because the kind of research I have been doing is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And she called for more such research. And that is what I hope that my talk will inspire younger researchers to take up as subjects of study, because there is so much scope, as we could see, even during the interest in epidemics and pandemics, especially in the last 2 years. I will begin my talk. We are also commemorating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. And therefore, my talk is going to look at some of the medical personnel who raised their voices during the colonial period on various issues. So I will look at these personalities, some of whom may be familiar to the audience, and some of whom may be, you may be coming across them during the course of my talk. Now, the first personality was this gentleman who, this thing is not moving. My screen.
Madam, you can share as a full screen, then it will move.
Yeah, it is full screen.
No, what you can do is stop the sharing and again share as a entire window. That will work.
Shall I stop share?
Yeah.
Now what happened?
And then share again as an entire window.
I'm so sorry for this. Oh, it's not moving.
Ma'am, it is visible. You can just scroll down the PPT.
No, it's not moving.
There is a up and down button, ma'am, in laptop.
But it's not moving. I think there's something wrong with my computer.
Go up, down.
No, it's not moving.
Close the PPT and show it without
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's moving. Yeah.
We have conquered it, technology. This gentleman whose cartoon you see is Kaikosro Nasarwanji Bahadurji. As you can see, he is labeled as conscientious, fearless, and independent. He spearheaded a campaign for medical reform in the 1890s. And his objective was to separate the civil from the military medical service. As most people may be aware, during the British rule, the ICS was a monopoly of the British. Similarly, the IMS was a monopoly of the British. And this is what Bahadurji spearheaded the campaign for, to open the IMS to Indians. In fact, it was pointed out that the salary which was paid to the subordinate medical service, which was manned by Indians, was as low as 100 to 200 rupees per month, while the IMS officers were paid as high as 2,500 per month. Now, Bahadurji took up this cause, and he argued that the government may have the right to choose its officers, but they must not forget that all these hospitals and colleges, which particularly in Bombay city, were funded by Indians, by Indian philanthropists. And the local press, Gujarati, Native Opinion, Maratha, and Bombay Samachar, endorsed Bahadurji's campaign. Bahadurji's campaign was also taken up at the Indian National Congress, in the Lahore session, the Madras session, the Pune session, and by the Bombay Presidency Association. Public meetings were held in Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. And Surendranath Banerjee, supporting the resolution at the Calcutta meeting, asserted that medical reform was part of the larger question of the wider employment of Indians. In fact, he paid tribute to Bahadurji, who had made this cause his own. Bahadurji even went to London and campaigned there, and there the Times and the Daily Chronicle commented favorably on his campaign, but the British medical fraternity were very hostile. As a representative of the Indian medical profession, Bahadurji even appeared before the Welby Commission on expenditure. And at the annual meeting of the British Medical Association held at Carlisle, Bahadurji moved a resolution that this civil medical department should cease to be a preserve of the IMS. But two retired IMS doctors, McNamara and Sir Joseph Ewart, stalled its acceptance. And there was a nasty comment in a letter written to the British Medical Journal by one Kenneth MacLeod, who said that no sane government would adopt Bahadurji's recommendations, and Indians have not shown their fitness for high positions that they aspire for. So this was the attitude of the British medical fraternity. Unfortunately, Bahadurji succumbed to plague in 1898. And this picture is a tribute to him. Now, doctors, Indian doctors trained in Western medicine were vital intermediaries in the promotion of Western medicine, smallpox vaccination in the 19th century, the work of Ananta Chandroba Dukle, Baudaji, Atmaram Pandurang, Shantaram Kantak. There are a number of these doctors who promoted smallpox vaccination in the face of superstition. Then there were the members of the Bombay Medical Union who were very powerful voices in Bombay's civic affairs. They would dissect the reports of the health officer. Thus, before the onset of plague, N.N. Katrak and Thomas Blaney, who was incidentally an Irishman, who was a private practitioner in Bombay, they indicted the health department before the onset of the plague, and they warned that something is coming. And it did come. Two other doctors, Acacio Vigas, who is the one who finally diagnosed bubonic plague, and Jan Mohammed, who diagnosed 2 cases of pneumonic plague, very infectious. During the plague, as is well known, draconian measures were imposed by the authorities because they didn't know where it came from and what to do. So there was inspection, disinfection, segregation of families, removed from the plague-stricken homes, and hospitalization. Now, my next slide will show you a figure who is, I think Dr. Majumdar mentioned, our Manjari's article on the Kasturba Hospital. This is N.H. Choksi. He was placed in charge of what is today Kasturba Hospital, but was called the Arthur Road Hospital. Hospitalization itself was something which was regarded intrusive. And Choksi has left an account of how he had to cope with, superstitions. There were so many pseudo specialists who would come to the hospital and claim to know all about plague and forget that they were trained conductors, railway guards, engineers, and so on. Choksi paid tribute to his colleagues, one Pilgaonkar and a lady doctor called Manik Tarkar, who helped him during the plague. It was not an easy task. In fact, Choksi became synonymous with the Infectious Diseases Hospital, of which was superintendent for 22 years. There was also, as we have seen during COVID, the danger of exposure to the disease. And you have not only Bahadurji, but 3 other names which I have found who succumbed to the disease, including a lady, Annie Walk. She was employed at Kama Hospital. She died of plague in 1898. There are many others, of course, but I have just given these 2 examples. Now, as is well known, this is the Arthur Road Infectious Diseases Hospital, which is today Kasturba Hospital. As is well known, Hafkin developed the plague prophylactic in 1897, and it was endorsed by Bhaiwarya. He was chairman of the standing committee of the Bombay Municipal Corporation. And he said the province of hygiene is not only to cure, but to prevent disease. So you have these Indian doctors who played a very vital role in promoting the prophylactic. How did they do that? In their forums, like the Bombay Medical Union, they're all graduates of the Grant Medical College, so the Grant College Medical Society, and so on. And also in local newspapers, because there were many doubts, just as today there are doubts about vaccination and so on. There were doubts, and that is the role that these medics performed. They answered queries, they discounted anxieties, and their role was to inform, to persuade, and to cajole. And the success of the promotion of the prophylactic in regions of the presidency, Bombay Presidency, was due to various doctors whose names I have, Tarkad, for example, Vishram Gole in Pune, and so on. But very interestingly, you have Rakhmabai. Rakhmabai, many of you may have heard of her. She worked during the plague and influenza epidemics in Surat and Rajkot, and later she was awarded the Kaisar-e-Hind for her work. She was a remarkable lady, and she requires, along with other women doctors, a separate lecture actually, according to me. Anyway, now what I want to also emphasize is that these doctors were also careful to protest against unnecessary imposition of measures, what they called foolish measures, which were attempted during the plague epidemic. This, I've got one example. In 1905, there was a smallpox epidemic, and they forcibly segregated smallpox patients at this Arthur Road Hospital. So as I also mentioned earlier, doctors were municipal councillors. So they cautioned that we should not have a repetition of what happened during the plague, just because Europeans dread smallpox. Choksi, in fact, showed that the efficacy of even one primary smallpox vaccination can reduce case mortality in afterlife. Now, in view of the very hostile reactions to the anti-plague measures, preventive medicine through persuasion was promoted in the early 1900s, and I have found a very unique public-private partnership in Bombay between Indian physicians. You have John Andrew Turner, who was health officer. He was a favorite of the Journal of Cartoons, Hindi Punch, and he is being drawn showing him chasing rats because as a Pied Piper, driving away plague, and similarly swatting mosquitoes. This man served as health officer for 2 decades, and he had this unique partnership with Choksi, whose picture I showed earlier, with Sir Ratan Tata, who funded a number of these activities, and Sir Firoz Shah Mehta. So you have this unique public-private partnership, which led to the establishment of semi-official bodies like the Bombay Sanitary Association, the Anti-Tuberculosis League, and because there was a recognition in the early 20th century that tuberculosis is also a public health challenge. It's not as dramatic a killer as cholera or smallpox, but a silent killer. So at the inaugural of this Anti-Tuberculosis League in 1912, Bhaiwarya assured the support of the non-official reformist Social Service League, and he ascribed the disease to overcrowding, insufficient ventilation, insanitary conditions, and unwholesome food. By Naurange, she pointed out that tuberculosis was wreaking havoc among the poorer classes, especially among the women. The subject, they felt, was connected with sanitation and hygiene, and it was therefore necessary to. This was Naurange's point. The other body which they promoted was the Lady Willingdon Scheme, which promoted antenatal and postnatal care, maternal and infant care, and the League for Combating Venereal Diseases, which provided information about venereal diseases, its prevention, and facilities for its treatment. In the early years of the 20th century, 1909, the Bombay Medical Congress was held, and these doctors presented papers. Choksi, in fact, I have a paper on him as a pioneer of clinical trials. He used the serum treatment in plague cases, and he reported that at the Bombay Medical Congress. Bhaiwarya had used it, the same serum treatment, with some patients, which he related. You also have doctors, concerned with the state of water in the city of Bombay. You have Kavasji Dada Chandji. He was also a doctor, president of the Bombay Medical Union. He emphasized the importance of pure water because cholera and typhoid were waterborne diseases, which they recognized. There were 2 other doctors who presented a paper at the Medical Congress, and they called it Unhygienic Bombay. And they ascribed the title to the fact that Bombay had a supply in spite of the lakes, overcrowding, imperfect sewerage system, pollution of the soil, improper location of cattle stables, and so on. Another public health challenge was malaria. Anti-malaria campaign, again, this same Dada Chandji asked the municipal commissioner in 1908 whether he was aware that since necessary steps had not been taken to drain stormwater drains, they had become breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So got this Charles Bentley from Bengal, who did a thorough study that the wells and cisterns which are open should be closed. Protesting against this move were the Parsis, which was unusual because the Parsis had been in the forefront of the acceptance of Western medicine. But they protested because well water exposed to the sun was necessary for their rituals. And the other objection was from the Hindus and Jains, who did not want wells to be stocked with fish. Fish ate the mosquito larvae in the wells. So anyway, this campaign was launched by the doctors again. And here again, you have Jamshedji Jijiboy exhorting his co-religionists to cooperate. He said to oppose the closure of wells is as much against the spirit and teaching of religion as it is against the laws of health. Firozshah Mehta maintained that these objections were more due to an inordinate attachment to custom than to a proper appreciation of the spirit which runs through religion. In fact, a weekly report of wells with larvae would be published in the newspapers, the Times of India, Jame Jamshed, Bombay Gazette, Bombay Samachar, and so on. Finally, the campaign did work for some time, but be that as it may, because I would like to cover some other aspects. Being familiar with local languages and cultural practices, these doctors were very vital in the regulations at pilgrim centers. As you know, Bombay Presidency has pilgrim centers, and there was the need to have immediate compliance of regulations at these centers. And authorities recognize the importance of these doctors. Da Gama is one, Anthony de Mello is another. Da Gama worked at Pandharpur in 1916, and so on. So these, and this happened even during the influenza epidemic of 1918. These, during which epidemic, most of the British doctors were away in the war. So it was these Indian doctors who kind of manned the stations which were set up, medical centers which were set up in the city. You have two doctors on the BMC medical subcommittee who visited dispensaries, Dr. Dada Chandji and MC Javle, and they pointed out a very relevant point to the authorities, which was that the prices of not only medicines but foodstuffs was very high. And they brought this to the attention of the authorities. Not that they did much, but it was important. At this point, Choksi made a very relevant observation. He said influenza reached a virulence before which even plague, with all its horrors, fades into insignificance. As you know, now there has been a lot of work on this on the influenza pandemic of 1918, and its the fatalities are even now being calculated. Now, the other aspect which I wanted to cover is the expansion of medical facilities in the 1920s. Now, this, in a sense, was a part of the national expression, what I would call the nationalist expression. This National Medical College was established in 1921 during the non-cooperation movement, and the aim was to impart to its students sound medical training of the progressive Western medical science and to preserve and popularize the best in the indigenous system, i.e., to combine the West, the best of the West with the best of the East, and to incorporate indigenous pharmacopoeias, to institute research into the indigenous systems of medicine, and to help in uplifting these indigenous systems of medicine. So this medical college was not initially affiliated to Bombay University. It was affiliated to the Bombay College of Physicians and Surgeons. And many of these doctors whose names I have mentioned were on the first council of the Bombay College of Physicians and Surgeons. Now, these students received clinical instruction at Nair Hospital, which was built in 1925 by Dr. A.L. Nair in memory of his mother. Both National Medical College and Nair Hospital did not receive government aid. Attached to these hospitals, these facilities, was T.K. Gajjar's Techno-Chemical Laboratory, the Yamunabai Nair Dental College, and a free ophthalmic hospital. This is an important institution. Of course, later as you know, it is part of Mumbai University. Now, another very interesting hospital which was set up in this period is King Edward Memorial, KEM. Now, why is it important? Because this was, in a sense, a realization of Bahadurji's dream. Bahadurji wanted a hospital to be set up which would be manned by Indians, where the equipment would be locally made. And this was done in KEM. It was headed by Dr. Jeevaraj Mehta. Two other hospitals which were set up at this time, Nauroji Wadia Maternity Hospital and the Bhaiwarya Hospital, providing free treatment to children. I mention this because when Sir Nasarwanji Wadia wanted to establish this hospital, as usual, the government wanted to annex the donation for JJ, because JJ was a government hospital. But Wadia refused. He said he wanted it in the mill area, and in fact, he increased his endowment, and you have these two hospitals which are still functioning. Now, the Bombay doctors, interestingly, did figure in the Bombay legislature. What is it that they spoke about? The IMS monopoly. In fact, after Bahadurji passed away, Bhatwadekar, it is said, one of the newspapers of the time wrote, never lost an opportunity for protesting vigorously against the jobberies perpetrated by the government of Bombay in the selection of professorships. The professorships at Grant Medical College were all monopolized by the IMS. When the Molly-Minto reforms were passed in 1909, they promised that a third of the appointments in the IMS would be filled by Indians. But the dispatch was one thing and the implementation another. Nothing was done. In fact, Kaisar-e-Hind wrote, I quote, "It is this evergreen and flourishing corporation of the white Brahmins which is the real master of the situation." They are talking about the British who were monopolizing the IMS. Indu Prakash also wrote about injustice towards qualified Indians. The only Indian on the IMS reorganization committee was T.B. Nariman, a doctor. It was only with the Montfort reforms, that is the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, that some steps were taken towards the realization of Bahadurji's dream. As we know, medical service was made a transferred subject under the 1919 Act, and ministers of local governments were responsible for the medical and public health departments, and they were answerable to the provincial legislative assemblies. Now, along with the IMS, the WMS was founded, that is the Women's Medical Service. Now here I have the picture of Rani Rajwade, who even in 1914 sent a memorial asking that the posts which were being created in the WMS should be reserved for local graduates. She later served in the AIWC. She was also on the subcommittee on women's welfare under the National Planning Committee. Now, the other issues which they took up, this particular gentleman, Dr. M.D.D. Gilder, he was a heart specialist, member of the Bombay Legislative Council for 10 years. He was health minister in the Bombay province, that is after the 1935 Act. And also he attended to the Mahatma at the Aga Khan Palace during his fast in 1944. Now, Gilder took up many of these issues I found were taken up by Gilder and other doctors in the legislature. And he referred to the inequalities. Before I come to the inequalities, he referred to the arrogance of the various commissions against Indians being employed, and how everything is being monopolized by he gave examples, in fact. He said a European doctor who is an IMS would be appointed to a professorship in midwifery. What was his qualification? MBBS from London and a postgraduate qualification from Europe. Gilder asked, in what way is he superior to a student who has completed a similar course in the local hospital attached to JJ? Excuse me. He has also referred to how the indigenous profession, by indigenous he means Indian doctors, were perceived to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. And beyond that, they need not look for anything. There's no doubt that in this period, even during Dayaki, the British Medical Association was very keen on holding on to the monopoly of the IMS. Now, the other issue which was taken up in the Bombay legislature was the discriminatory allocation of grants. Again, you have Gilder showing that the amount of money grant which was given to what was called European General Hospital and later St. George's. It's still there, St. George's, it's a government hospital. St. George's was a hospital for Europeans, Anglo-Indians, and so on. So he showed that the amount spent on 5,443 patients was twice the amount spent on patients at GT Hospital, where there were 17,000 patients. Similarly, you have one Dr. M.K. Dikshit from Surat observing that the sanitary condition in that city was miserable, and the government had not spent any money on the waterworks. The municipality had to bear it, and this Dr. Dikshit continuously raised the issue of the neglect of Surat in the Bombay legislature. Now, the reason I mention these doctors raising these issues is that they were concerned with public health. They were concerned with inequalities in healthcare between the urban and the rural areas. So you have Choksey again, writing to the Times of India in 1923, saying that there should be a special sanitary, preventive, and curative service. He said the masses are not ready for an intensive campaign of sanitary education, but what they need is a concrete demonstration of the benefits promised. In fact, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, commended this article. Dadat Chandji continuously raised this issue. He said there should be a comprehensive scheme for sanitary and medical relief, both in the urban and the rural areas. It's only then that the heavy mortality from epidemics would be reduced. And he says, people must first be saved before you talk about educating them and so on. he tried to move this resolution in the legislature for 4 years, and he proposed that a committee should be established. The Minister of Health was B.V. Jadhav. In his reply, he regretted that while the government wanted to have more health officers, financial stringency was the restraint. In fact, Jadhav said that the House is sick of these committees. Anyway, obviously nothing was done because again in 1931, there is a reference made in the legislative proceedings to the comment made by Major Bhatia. He was the Dean of Grant Medical College. He belonged to the IMS. And he said, beyond lip sympathy, the government does nothing for the rural areas. They are the Cinderella of the administration. The other issue which the doctors debated were the high salaries paid to the British officials, assistant deputy directors of public health and so on. And they also pointed out that during an epidemic, the giving of plague inoculations was left to private practitioners while the officials would not go into the slums. And they also pointed out bureaucratic delays in the official reaction to an epidemic. In fact, criticism was leveled against the Director of Public Health, whose headquarters was in Pune, but he would be touring in Sindh because he wanted to collect the traveling allowance. That's what they alleged. When there was an outbreak, the police Patel would report to the Mamlatdar, and he would report to the collector, and then he would report to the Assistant Director of Public Health. Then they would give instructions to the sanitary inspectors, and by that time, the epidemic had done its havoc in the rural. So these points were raised by these doctor legislators, as I call them. The other issue they took up was the paucity of Indian nurses. Again, it's Gilder who pointed out that in the Bombay Presidency hospitals, excluding Kama, there were 46 nurses in the administrative grade. This is in the year 1928, he pointed out. 42 of them were Europeans and only 4 Indians. So this was another issue which they took up. Yet another issue is the registration of medical practitioners. Now, what do I mean by them? That is the practitioners of Ayurveda and Unani. The Bombay Medical Act was passed in 1912, and K.N. Panikkar has shown that the intent of the government was to supplant indigenous with Western medicine and to keep out the Veds and Hakims. But the proponents of the act argued that actually they wanted to exclude quacks. Anyway, the BMA, the Bombay Medical Act, was passed, and it spelled out the recognized qualifications, which were university degrees, government school diplomas, and so on, which were not what Veds and Hakims had. Following this, 1912, in 1916, the government of Bombay collected data to check what is the real picture. The real picture that emerged was that there was very extensive popular support for Ayurveda and Unani. But the government of Bombay did nothing about it. But the Chopra Committee in 1923, headed by Chopra of the Pharmacology Department of the Calcutta School of Tropical Medicine, he proposed an integration of Indian and Western systems. Now, under Dayaki, that is the period after 1919, some attempts were made to support the indigenous systems. The government of Bombay gave sanctions to the district local board in Satara to establish and maintain an Ayurvedic dispensary, similarly in Ahmednagar. But they did one other thing during Dayaki, which was protested against by the newspapers. And that is, they trained primary school masters at civil hospitals for 2.5 months. to dress wounds, to treat sore eyes, to recognize and treat some diseases, to provide instruction in elementary hygiene, how to safeguard water supply, anti-malaria precautions, distribute quinine, and so on. 30 of these men were appointed, and they worked in Pune, Bijapur, Sholapur, and Dharwad. The scheme, however, was strongly criticized in the press. Kesari saw this as training in the use of foreign drugs and encouragement to foreign products. Bombay Samachar saw it as a ploy to root out Ayurveda and Unani. Bombay Chronicle also saw it as a sinister ploy to divert funds from modernizing the Ayurvedic system. Anyway, under Dayaki, the number of dispensaries, Ayurvedic and Unani, opened by municipalities and district local boards increased considerably. Now, there is another very interesting aspect which I have mentioned in this slide, and that is the research into indigenous remedies. There was at the Hafkin Institute two figures. One was a Jesuit priest called Father K.S., and the other was K.S. Musker. He was trained in tropical medicine, Musker. Father K.S. was a Frenchman. He became a Jesuit. He trained at the L'École de Médecins in Paris. He taught chemistry at Tiruchirappalli, and in 1922, he was transferred to St. Xavier's College, Bombay. Together, they gained repute. Father K.S. gained repute for his work as a chemist. He researched on quinine, antivenin, and worm removers. Both of them worked on the therapeutic value of indigenous drugs, and they presented these papers at the Indian Science Congress in Benares in 1925. K.S. and Musker's contribution in examining Indian plant remedies for snake bite was commended. Now, Gilda again raised this issue of research into the properties of indigenous drugs in the Bombay Legislative Council session. Again in 1932, this was 27. Again, 5 years later, he raised the issue. And he said, Father K.'s assistant should be taken to prepare an Indian pharmacopoeia. But the view of the colonial establishment was different. I quote them, "It is inimical to the good name of India to continue booming medicines for no other reason than that they are Swadeshi." The Department of Indigenous Remedies was closed and 2 senior officers were retrenched. This was at Hafkin Institute. Now, I have one more very interesting figure. Yes, there were a number of Indian researchers at the Hafkin Institute in the early 20th century and even later. In fact, I have a paper on the Hafkin Institute and the work that they did. I'm sure you could read this slide. These are all the people who were in the early years. Thereafter, there are very many of them, which is in my paper. And as you can see, Surveyor was the one who injected Hafkin with a prophylactic with a dose which was 4 times stronger than what was later accepted as standard. Shantaram Kantak took part in experiments on variola and vaccina. He was a smallpox, a superintendent of smallpox vaccination. Then you have C.R. Avari, who was a member of the Plague Research Commission. It is this commission which established that plague spread from the rat to man through the rat flea. And they also established that bubonic plague was not infectious, but pneumonic plague was. This was the work of the Plague Research Commission, which published its report in 1908. Then there is D.A. Tarkad, who later became assistant director. Then there is S.N. Gore, who worked on the bacteriological examination of water for detection of B. coli, dysentery, bacilli, and cholera like Vibrio. Soperkar, who carried out experiments to determine the effect of varying degrees of temperature upon nutritive quality of blood when added to a plain medium for the cultivation of hemophilic organisms. There are many others, but the next figure is very fascinating. This is Sahib Singh Soki. In fact, somebody should do a work on him. He was the first Indian director of the Hafkin Institute, and he joined the Hafkin Institute in 1925. As you can see from the slide, he was an MBBS, MD, and an MA in economics from the University of Edinburgh. He was a member of the IMS. He was a brilliant biochemist, recipient of the Rockefeller Fellowship. He trained at Harvard, Toronto, and Cambridge. He was also later chairman subcommittee on national health in the NPC, and he was an MP in the Rajya Sabha. Now, what I would like to mention about him is something very interesting, which I came across at the Rockefeller archives. And that is one of the Rockefeller officials visited Hafkin Institute. And he was shown around. This was during the period 1927 to 28. At that time, Soki was not yet director. He had just returned from the Rockefeller Fellowship, and he was very frustrated because he wanted to do biochemistry, but they wanted him to do, he said they wanted him to look at soldiers' tongues. That is what he says in the records. Not only that, this Hackett, who was from the Rockefeller Foundation, he met Soki, and Soki took him around, but Soki was very angry. Why? Because just then, Catherine Mayo's Mother India had been published. As you know, Mahatma Gandhi dismissed it as drain inspector's report. Hackett was very struck by the fact that Soki was anti-British and he was for absolute Indian independence. So Hackett felt that it is because of this mental attitude on Soki's part that his work was criticized by the British. It's a very interesting figure who merits a whole PhD thesis. Anyway, finally, Dr. Masram, how much time do I have? Hello?
Masram sir, yeah, how much time left now?
Another 10 minutes, ma'am.
Okay, I will just conclude. Thank you very much. Finally, I would like to talk about a medical. Oh, these are all the lady doctors. I just added them, but as I said, they merit a whole different, a lot of them. Anyway, I would like to finally talk about a bill which was passed in 1938. I don't know how many are aware of this. This is called the Medical Practitioners Bill. Here again, it was Gilder who introduced it, and he contended that there was no encouragement to Ayurveda and Unani from the government of Bombay. Now, this bill was passed in 1938. Under the Government of India Act of 1935, provincial autonomy was introduced. Elections were held in 1937. The Indian National Congress gained a majority in 7 out of 11 provinces, and they formed governments, including in Bombay. Now, the proposed act which Gilder introduced was to regulate the qualifications, to fix a curricula so that the people who practiced the Indian systems of medicine were qualified, and to provide for their registration. They were to be given 2 years, and they would also have the same powers and privileges as allopathic doctors in a court of law. This act was passed, but there were criticisms in the Legislative Council, and some of them I will mention. One of them was there any check on foreign doctors who came into India to practice allopathy? This was one question. The other question was, Indian systems of surgery and midwifery would disappear if the board took these from allopathy. Then there was the criticism that homeopaths and naturopaths have not been included in this registration. Naturopathy should be included, said one of the legislators, citing the support of Mahatma Gandhi for nature cure. And they said, government is not going to spend by establishing colleges, but it is only appointing a board in order to regulate the curriculum of colleges teaching Ayurveda and Unani. And they also alleged that this is not so much to prevent quacks as to keep Veds and Hakims out, especially those who had studied outside Bombay Presidency, even studied at the very reputed Tibia College set up by Hakim Ajmal Khan in Delhi. So these were the criticisms, but nevertheless, there were also objections to what was called mixed education, which was being given in Anglo-Ayurvedic schools. And however, there was one voice which supported the bill, and that person mentioned that it is better that we give this because in rural areas, there is no health care. So the Vaid, this gentleman mentioned that the Vaid or whoever would, these doctors trained in Western medicine don't want to go and stay in the villages. So these Ayurvedic practitioners and Unani practitioners should be registered and should be allowed to practice in rural areas. This is the point made by one of the legislators who supported the bill. Anyway, the government of Bombay passed the act, and before independence, you have a statutory board of Indian systems of medicine set up in 1939, which functioned for 9 years and prescribed training. And in fact, it recognized 9 institutions, 7 of them in Bombay. And there was also a scheme introduced to subsidize allopaths who went and practiced in rural areas, and also increase the number of midwives and nurses attached to local board dispensaries and so on. So, however, as those who have worked on health would know, the Boer committee did not deal with indigenous medicine, and this led to a lot of public criticism. And we would not go into that right now. I would just like to conclude by saying I've tried to give a bird's eye view of these doctors. Today is National Science Day, but these doctors played a vital role. And what struck me when I was researching them, informed views which they expressed both in forums and in the newspapers and in the legislature finally. Now, their views show professional insight, empathy, and concern. They were trained in Western medicine, so they were convinced of its efficacy. But at the same time, as you could see, they did recognize the need for encouraging the indigenous system of medicine, especially in the provincial, for providing rural health care. Now, in the 19th century, I have come across examples of doctors who prescribed many indigenous remedies, including Baudaji and Narandaji, J.C. Lisboa and Dargalkar. They prescribed R.N. Corey and Narandaji. They wrote a treatise on materia medica. Sakaram Arjun cataloged Bombay drugs and medicinal plants. So these doctors, even though they were trained in Western medicine, did have an interest in these indigenous, and there are examples from the 19th century, and you saw the example of Father Caius and Musker, which I provided. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope we have, is there a question and answer?
Yeah, madam.
Yes.
So thank you, madam, for your very excellent and elaborative talk. You nicely narrated about contribution of Indian doctors during colonial period, particularly in the Bombay region, then Bombay region. Also, you elaborated on how these doctors fought against discrimination, whether it was the discrimination against the salaries or the grants allocation, and also there was like paucity of the Indian nurses and so on. So you rightly mentioned and covered each and every aspect. And as you have told about Dr. Sahib Singh Sodhi, I am sure some of the history students will take up this topic and do research in that particular area. So now, before I take up the questions from the audiences, I first wish everyone a very greetings on the Science Day. Give greetings to all the participants and the madam and all the everyone, all the dignitaries on this particular Science Day. Greetings to all. So now moving to the question answer session, madam, there are some questions in the chat box, and I also have a couple of queries in my own mind. So I will take up that at the end. So one of the participants has asked, yeah, I think these questions are quite big. Maybe I will have to fragment them. Yeah, let me, yeah. Okay, I was curious to know as to how many Indian doctors graduated in India were serving in these hospitals in Bombay Presidency. So this is one question. Then that is followed by a sub question. Where these doctors also associated with the nationalist movement? So that is the question.
Yes, can I answer?
Yes, yes. So I'll read it part by part because the big question it is.
Yeah. No, I would request this questioner to look at my work. I have two books on this, 1845 to 95 and 96 to 1930, where I have covered Indian doctors, and the statistics are there. How many doctors graduated and where they served and so on, including women physicians. Now, as for what was the second question?
Yeah, whether they were involved with the nationalist movement.
Yes, they were. I mean, they were, because I mentioned Gilda, who was attended to Mahatma Gandhi, but that apart, I have come across examples, but we must remember that they were full-time medical practitioners. They were providing treatments, Of course, one can argue and say that some of them were private practitioners, some of them had very lucrative practices and so on. But yet, there is no doubt from what I have found in my research that they were engaged in a number of issues. Maybe they were not, there are perhaps examples of people who took part in the nationalist movement per se, but you do have them playing a role, especially in, as I have shown, promoting health, public health. That is so important. And as I pointed out, they were the ones who raised issues of public health in the municipality, the neglect of public health, in the municipality. That's why I titled my presentation, saying raising issues of public health. This is what I feel that was their contribution. But yes, that could be again a study of those who participated in the national movement. Bahadurji, of course, took up the cause of the IMS monopoly, which was taken up by the Indian National Congress, as I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Further question goes like this. What was the financial support to indigenous and Western medicine as prescribed by different hospitals in Bombay Presidency? Was there gender discrimination in case of medical profession barring Indian or Western doctors in Bombay Presidency?
Yeah. You know that that point I did make, discriminatory allocation of grants. You know, because when the hospital catered to Europeans, naturally there was more money given by the government, while with the other public hospitals, which were actually set up with Indian money, JJ, Indian philanthropies supported many, I'm only mentioning JJ, but GT Hospital, Gokuldas Tejpal Hospital, and so on, they were set up with Indian funds, Indian philanthropy. So the point is that, yes, there was clearly a discrimination in the grants. And in fact, the newspapers even point out these contemporary newspapers of that time. The other question about gender, it's a very interesting question because, you know, like as I mentioned, the lady Rani Rajwade taking up the women's medical service issue. Her point was, you are starting this women's medical service because you want to provide a berth for British women doctors. British women doctors are not getting a space in Britain, so you're providing a space for them here. Why not us? So her point was, because she qualified at the Grant Medical College, and there were other ladies also, and her point was that, so there is no doubt this gender angle in the attitude of the British, though some, I mean, women's health and so on, it's a whole big subject. There were some areas where British male doctors did not intervene because of sensibilities and so on. But British women doctors would like to be there. They would like to have a berth in India, and they would naturally be paid much more than our local graduates. In fact, one of the ladies whose picture I showed, Jerusha Jirat, she was the first Indian woman, medical officer at Kama. Yeah.
Okay. So now next question is, according to you, madam, do we need to build more government hospitals so that more accessible and affordable healthcare can be provided? Because a pandemic has shown that particular kind of thing.
Yes.
So that is the question.
I agree. There should be more government hospitals. Yes.
Yeah. In spite of so many difficulties that the Indian doctors encountered during colonial rule, so according to you, madam, what kept them motivated?
I feel that, as I said, you know, after all, you know, when people take up medicine, I feel, I'm not a medical doctor, but I feel that there is some kind of, and we saw the examples during the COVID of the many, many doctors who work night and day to provide relief and succor to the patients. So I feel that it is empathy, you know, empathy and concern. I mean, it is a kind of humanitarian concern which moves this profession. That's what I feel.
Okay. So how our Indian doctors fought with the Spanish flu during colonial Bombay, in which novel is also written called as yes, Bombay Fever.
What?
The question is not very clear, but how our Indian doctors fought with Spanish flu during the colonial.
Yeah, they were, as I said, they were very involved in that. And I have found some evidence of doctors who were, actually the evidence that I found is very interesting. It was the voluntary agencies which played a very important role during the influenza epidemic in Bombay in 1918. In fact, this, if any of your audience want to, there was this article of mine was published in the paper scroll.in. And of course, a paper on this has been published in a volume which came out in London. But the point is that this was very interesting, that voluntary agencies rose to the occasion because the authorities were not bothered. They didn't know what to do. There were not enough doctors because they were in the war. And therefore you have, okay, somebody here.
Well, madam, there are no questions in the chat box, but I have a couple of queries from my side.
Please.
This discrimination which you are talking about, that was there in the colonial period. But as of now, at the international level, is that discrimination existing for Indian doctors and foreign doctors?
That's a very big question.
Okay.
Yeah. I am no expert, Dr. Garje, I am no expert on, I like to be in history.
Right. In history perspective, I am talking about, not as a medical.
Yes, yes. At that time, yes, as I have shown you, so many examples of, discrimination. And in fact, this Bahadurji also is such an interesting character. This Bahadurji, when he trained in England and he came back and he got a job in Grant Medical College, but he fell out with the British boss. So he resigned and he set up his own private practice. Right. And he set up a hospital. During the plague, he worked very hard. And as I said, he succumbed to plague.
Yeah. And my own curiosity purpose, I have one question. Like you are talking about freedom period. After the independence, whatever medical history is there any work by historians done in this field?
There is a lot of work being done on the post-independence period. And in fact, there should be more work done. There's work on ICMR. There is work on separate diseases, tuberculosis, what is that called? Malaria control, on smallpox. My friend Sanjoy Bhattacharya has worked on smallpox and eradication of smallpox. And another very interesting personality whom students could look at is Rajkumari Amrit Kaur. She was the health minister post-independence. They should look at her papers.
Okay. So I think someone was raising hand. Anyone has any question? Just quickly put in chat.
Dr. Devraj sir, please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Sir. Ma'am, thank you for this wonderful, thought-provoking lecture, as expected. Ma'am, I have a simple query with you. You have referred to the Bombay Presidency case. I would like to know from you that what was the response of the society, that means the common people, from the part of the common people towards this Western medical science. Because I am from West Bengal, in Calcutta, in West Bengal, the people have reacted in many cases, but in many cases we found document shows that the people had good response to the Western medical system also. And the recent work of Professor Sujata Mukherjee ma'am, must be aware of that ma'am, is very noteworthy in this regard. And what is your response in case of Bombay Presidency, ma'am?
No, there is no doubt that Western medicine was accepted, especially in the urban areas. You see, it is in my point in making that, I think what probably, I hope I didn't create a confusion on that, but the point is that when they did that survey in 1916, the purpose of the government of Bombay was to find out to what extent was the support for Ayurveda and Unani. And they found that, yes, in the rural area, that is the only healthcare that was being, because, you know, there's one thing about the colonial state, they were not willing to spend. I mentioned the philanthropists who founded hospitals and dispensaries. Invariably, the donation would say that it should be maintained by the government, but the government was so stingy about it. As for the question of Western medicine, there's no doubt that in the cities of Bombay, you could read my work, all three of my books on medical history, where I have shown that, yes, Western medicine was accepted, but the purpose, particularly, I wanted to show how, because I have worked extensively on the acceptance of Western medicine, especially in the urban areas, I wanted to show how they were also interested in looking at these other systems. That was the point. I don't know whether I answered your question, Dr. Chakrabarti.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Fantastically. The document you have referred and the comparison you have mentioned here, it is fantastic, ma'am. And I would like to inform you that I am aware of your work and I read some of your work for my students. I have also referred your work, ma'am. It's an excellent work, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chakravarti. And finally, I would like to make some concluding remarks. Madam, you nicely correlated science with the history. In fact, I'm a chemistry professor, and when I teach any chemistry subject, any topic, I go into history part of it and teach in a sequence manner. And then I find the difference in the students. They really understand the subject.
Yeah.
So I was, when the history department told me that I have to chair the session, then I was going this particular topic which you now talk about. Then I could find that the Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic practice, which our Vaidyas used to practice, it dates back to 600 BC. So it is a long history it has. And this Hakims which practice Unani, that came into the India in the century of 20th. I mean, that period. It came into existence in India. Of course, before that, it was practiced in other part of the world. But particularly when the Europeans, they came into the India during 16th century, then these Western medicines that started, I mean, people started practicing here. And what I could read in the literature is that in the beginning, there was a mutual understanding, and Vaidyas, Hakims, and the Western practitioners of the medicine, they used to take the help of each other and nicely practice it. But later on, somehow Western practitioners, they got the superiority complex. And the reason I would trace that it was basically because of their scientific approach. Like whatever they do, it is like more scientifically they do it. Even documentation is properly done. And you know that few years back we had to struggle with the filing of the patent of the haldi. So because we do not have proper documentation, and so that is the kind of thing. And therefore, these Western practitioners and Western medicine, allopathy got dominance over the Unani and the Ayurveda. But now slowly again it is establishing. Now coming, I was also reading some of your own papers. Then I thought, let me know what you are doing. I'm sorry, I'm not much aware of your work, but I read one article in your this economic weekly, which is there, in which you have written paper on epidemics in South Asian history. And in that, you nicely explain about the role of women doctor in the Bombay region that time. So you gave some of the examples in that particular paper. I read actually entire paper which talks about the contribution of women doctors like Anandibai Joshi, Gurubai Karmakar, Kantibai Sadana, and Motibai Kapade, and so on. So very nicely explained there. And I myself have got some interest now in this particular field. So as rightly you are, correlating these two subjects. I would like to put at the end in this manner that science drives the society and society drives the science. So both way it is like this. And in the beginning, Masram sir said that history is mother of all the other subjects, and that is very true. Just to give the example to our audience, like how atom bomb was discovered, and for that we have to go back to the history of it, and we have to go back to the 1930th, that particular year, when the Second World War was going on, and then this particular dangerous weapon was discovered, atom bomb. And that is how the political will has forced the scientists to come out with the atom bomb kind of thing. So this is how the society drives science. And at the same time, we can also have an example of how science can be beneficial for the society. For example, if you take the example of polymer, then the polymer chemistry was developed by a scientist known as Herman in the year 1920. And we can imagine with the polymer how the drastic change has come into existence. We can imagine the life, we cannot imagine life without rubber. We could not have had the vehicles and many other things. So both way it is very true that politics leads society, and the science, and science leads the society. So I think all the teachers, whatever subject you are teaching, teach in the historical point of view, and then students understand it in much better way. And from my bottom of heart, I really tell you that I teach in the same manner, and students really understand it. So with this note, I thank the organizer, Masram sir, Manjari Kamath madam, and we also have Dr. Kharat with us. So thanks to all of you and the history department for giving me opportunity to chair this session. Thank you very much. Over to you now, Masram sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving a very valuable chairperson remark on this special occasion. Now, I would like to request, I think Professor Dr. Kharat sir not here because sir has some assignment, important assignment. So now, ma'am, sir is here.
No, he is in a meeting right now.
Okay, okay, yes, ma'am. So the last part of last but not least, the part is vote of thanks. So I would like to request Professor Dr. Manjari Kamath ma'am for giving a vote of thanks of this seminar. Over to ma'am.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks. And first of all, on this occasion of National Science Day, and also while we are celebrating, this 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, I think it's a wonderful sort of opportunity to reach across the boundaries. The time has come, as Professor Majumdar, Professor Garje have emphasized, to go beyond our disciplinary boundaries. The new education policy also is emphasizing this kind of work. And I must say that having known Professor Dr. Mridula Ramanna for many years, she's a pioneer in this field. She has done pioneering work in the field of history of medicine and public health, and is a huge source of inspiration for all of us. So I take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the Department of History and School of International Relations and Strategic Studies for agreeing to do this lecture on this momentous occasion, and for enlightening us with the galaxy of doctors who have done, who have contributed in such a big way, but little was known about them, to us. So thank you very much. And I also take this opportunity to thank Professor Anuradha Majumdar for her insightful comments at the beginning of this talk as the chief guest for today's function, where she again emphasized the coming together of different fields. And I think more than ever today we realize, especially with the last 2 years experience of the pandemic and the current challenges which the world is facing, that how much it is needed for different disciplines to come together in the service of humanity. It is a really proud moment to have Professor Garji with us. We've been working for last few years together in the university as associate deans. So it's a big pleasure to have you here chairing our seminar on the occasion of National Science Day. And we are glad to know that your students, while you're teaching chemistry, you do go into the history of science, which is, which is important for science students as well as for our students. So thank you, Professor Garji sir, for accepting our request and for your remarks at the end. Professor Kharat, right from the beginning, has been with us for the entire organization of this event, but he has had to go to Delhi, and because of some meeting, he had joined earlier, but he's not able to be with us. But he sends his best wishes to us and has been with us through the organization of this. Dr. Prakash Masram, you are a huge source of support for all these events on academic activities of the department. And sir has taken a lot of effort in the organization of this whole seminar, in addition to his responsibilities as head of the department with so many, duties. So we thank the head for supporting these activities and supporting these events and organizing it with such enthusiasm. I can see today that faculty members have joined us, not just from Mumbai, but across the jurisdiction of the University of Mumbai, including the Konkan, including Calcutta, from different parts of the country. There are doctors who have joined us. We are really thankful. Dr. Shubha, I think, is Dr. Shubhada Pandya, who has joined us, who has worked on leprosy and the history of leprosy with the guidance of Dr. Mridula Ramanna. So we thank all of you, Dr. Shubhada Pandya, Dr. Kaudi, who is with us, Dr. Debraj Chakrabarti, who's joined us from Calcutta, as well as our own faculty from the affiliated colleges across the jurisdiction of the university. Dr. Vikas Mehendale is with us, Dr. Baban Jadhav, Dr. Efigene Tuscano, Dr. Ankush Sohni, Dr. Somnath Kadam, all the way from Kankavli on the borders of Goa, of the college from our university. Ajit Kumar, Dr. Rekha Gore, and several of you who have joined us today. A big thank you for being with us. I also wish to thank our faculty members for all their support through the organization of the seminar. So thank you, Professor Dr. Neeta Khanpekar, for that wonderful introduction. And I do share with you when you say, how much we miss Dr. Ramanna, who visited our department for lectures and also helped us with exams, all the work, and is still a source of inspiration for us. Thank you, Dr. Khanpekar, for the introduction, Dr. Anagha Kamble, Dr. Grishma Rana for being with us today. And of course, last but not the least, it's our students. I think what Professor Garji, Professor Masram, Dr. Ramanna have emphasized, that there are so many new areas which Madam has highlighted in her lecture. So it's up to our students to, to work on these different areas and enrich the field of history of science, technology, environment, and medicine. So with these words, I thank Professor Masram for giving me this opportunity. And I think we can draw to the close of this particular session. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Masram.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sir, we should have a screenshot. Masram,
Yeah.
sir.
So, ma'am, so I request to all dignitaries and respective resource person, chairperson, please, switch on your camera. So I'll just take a photo, screenshot within a 1 minute. Okay.
With smile. Ah, great.
Yeah,
Yes, Debrajji, just switch on your camera.
Oh, no, it's not required. It's okay, fine.
Okay. Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yes.
Dr.
Thank you.
Raman.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
evening.
Sir, with the permission of chair, sir, shall we end up the meeting?
Yes, yes, we can end.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.